Hello, Blenders, and welcome to episode number 284 of ReelBlend, a podcast that you can listen to 3 times and still not be done with Killers of the Flower Moon. My name is Sean O'Connell, the managing editor here at CinemaBlend. On this week's show, Marty Scorsese is back in theaters on the big screen with Killers of the Flower Moon, an adaptation of a book that every time I mention this movie to somebody, they're all like, oh, I read the book. It was amazing. Like, I didn't realize that. I know the book was popular and I knew it was well received, but like legitimately everyone that I've talked to is like, oh my God, I read that book. It's incredible. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. We're going to have a spoiler-free review for Killers of the Flower Moon. And then we're going to get into a spoiler section where we're going to get into some of the things that potentially elevated the film in the eyes of the hosts, or maybe pulled it down. We'll see where that conversation goes. So stay tuned. In the meantime, let me introduce the guys to this week's episode, starting with my good friend Kevin McCarthy of Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. Kev, the Foo Fighters are going to be playing on Saturday Night Live. Did you see that?
I did see that, but more importantly, the day this episode comes out, Sean and I are very excited about a very particular release that's happening on this day that you're listening to this.
Yes.
If you're a Blink-182 fan, the new album apparently is out as we're talking. And I know Sean and I will, as you're listening to this, Sean and I are probably texting about Anthem Part 3 already and figuring out, where that plays into the scope of their music. But I'm so excited. And Sean may have a special interview coming up if it happens.
If it happens.
Big week. New Scorsese and new Blink-182. I mean, we're living in good times.
We are
good
eating
times
well
from a music and a film perspective. Yeah.
Yes, as the kids like to say, we're eating well. Jake Hamilton confirms that it's Hat Day today.
It is Hat Day.
Yeah. I didn't get the message, unfortunately. Jake Hamilton's at Fox 32 in Chicago. Hello there, handsome. How are you?
I'm doing well, buddy. I love your shirt.
Thank
For
you
those
very
of you
much.
watching on YouTube, you always get treated to all the amazing shirts that Sean's wearing.
I think
my
this is
other
Sean's
joke-
second Black Panther. What is going on again with the balloons? Maybe it's when I do this. Is it?
It is.
No, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right.
Look at that.
When I do the peace sign.
At the break, we'll work to turn that off. I forgot we didn't do that.
That's really funny.
This is Sean's second week, I believe, back to back wearing a Black Panther shirt.
That might be right.
I think you wore a Marvel one last week.
I do have
That was
that
Black
one, yes.
Panther. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm celebrating the release of that new MCU book, which I just got a copy of today, and I'm really
cool.
looking forward to
I want to read that.
diving into. Yeah, it's massive. It's like a 500-page tome, so I'm really excited to pick away at it. Jake, my opening joke was going to be a podcast that got Martin Scorsese. Well, one of us did. And then I thought that was a little bit too mean. Gabe Kovach is sitting in the producer's chair. Hello, Gabe. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Good.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you
A
guys as
rare
well,
occasion where all 4 of us, I feel like lately it's been rare, all 4 of us have seen the movie of the week this week.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Gabe got to see it before me. That made me a little bit upset.
Yeah, I texted him all the spoilers.
Yeah.
It's just too much power. I couldn't handle it.
Leo's mean.
You just wait until Sean sees Trolls before you. You are so screwed.
Oh, do you know what I am seeing? So I'm going to Savannah this weekend for the film festival, and I get to see Zone of Interest.
I'm seeing that tonight, which I'm not. I don't want to say not looking forward to, but like
It's heavy.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's a
like
combination. Oh, yeah. I mean, but it's a combination of, and this is me being spoiled. It's a theater across town that I have to Uber to that I never. It's at 8, which is a little bit later than these screenings normally are.
Right.
And the subject matter. It is a trifecta of. But I'm interviewing the lead actor tomorrow. It's just one of those, like, I'm sure it's going to be amazing. I'm just not looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, I understand that. And it's so true. We are like creatures of habit. Like a 7 o'clock movie is perfect. But
Sure.
if it's 7:30, I start to be like, what do we?
Yeah.
And
Well, dude, like,
8.
it also, like 7, and granted, I'm very spoiled that a majority of my screenings, the main theater where they do press screenings is 2 blocks from my apartment. So I'm incredibly spoiled. So a 7 o'clock screening, 2 blocks from my apartment is amazing. 8 o'clock across town, it literally makes me go, oh, do I want to go?
Sometimes Kev has to drive an hour to
I
get
know.
to a
I
screen.
really should stop complaining.
Yeah,
Well,
Washington can be
I was
awful.
happy that my Killers of the Flower Moon screening was at 6:30. I was like, they're creeping a little more on the earlier
Well,
side.
especially because you and I have morning shows. I mean, that's
Yeah.
And luckily, I think, as is the case with my reps and hopefully yours, they tend to be very aware of that.
Yeah.
Of our morning show situation.
All right, let's get the show back on the road with some housekeeping. If you are watching us on YouTube, hello, thank you very much for joining us. Go down, hit subscribe, turn on your notifications. On Friday, when the new episodes drop, you guys will be the first ones to hear about it. And you can let us know in the comments down below where y'all are listening to. I have been reading everybody's comments telling us how they listen to the show, where they listen to the audio, how they listen in their car, on different apps. Some people coming over to the YouTube channel for the very first time to check us out. So I found that to be really, really cool. It's youtube.com/ReelBlend podcast. And first off, we appreciate you guys in whatever format that you listen to us. We just love you guys coming back here every single week to listen to us yammer. Of course, we're available all the different places you get your podcast needs met. And if you're available or interested, in ReelBlend Premium, you get an ad-free version of the show and a newsletter from me. This is newsletter week, so I'll have something interesting for you guys to read in your inboxes. So check the description for information on where you can sign up. All right, so when a master like Martin Scorsese puts a new movie out, we dedicate an entire episode to it. And Killers of the Flower Moon is coming to theaters does anybody know when it's going to Apple? Like how long?
I don't think
theaters?
they've released it. I think
announced.
smartly they haven't announced it. I think that's a good. Well, I think that's a good tactic because if it comes out October 20th, but we know that the streaming date is December 1st, then I think there are too many audience members who go, it's 3.5 hours, and I know it starts streaming on December 1st. I think you go full theatrical first.
This question actually made me think. Is this actually a great thing for an awards type play where put it in theaters and then whenever you need awards buzz,
sure,
put it out in January or February,
it's the equivalent of they always used to talk about like if your movie happened to come out on DVD during award season.
It's perfect,
it's the equivalent. It's the cinematic equivalent of having your cake and eating it too. You get that recent bias of coming out in theaters, but also right as that buzz dies down, oh boom, by the way, we're available to stream at home.
So Scorsese's been trying to tell this story for a really long time. And I don't know when the book came out, but it's a historical piece. It's set in when is it? 1920s?
I think that's where it starts.
Yes. It's a pretty wide span of time, but it's safe to say early 20th century.
Okay. And it takes place in Oklahoma on the territory of the Osage Native American community. And at this time, they discover on their land that underneath their land is a significant amount of oil, which, as you learn in the title cards, setting this story up, makes the Osage community the wealthiest per capita Americans at the time. They just had a staggering amount of wealth. And there's a lot of story to chew on over the course of the telling of Killers of the Flower Moon. So we're going to get into a spoiler-free review first. So we can talk a little bit at length and set you guys up, knowing that coming out on Friday, most people probably haven't had a chance to go see it yet. And so we will let you know when we start to get into specifics and spoilers in terms of that conversation. Kev, I want you to start because I know Jake loves Scorsese, but it seems like when Scorsese works with DiCaprio, those tend to be some of your favorite collaborations. I know you talk about The Aviator, huge fan of Wolf of Wall Street. Where do you put this in terms of like their collaborations, and what do you think he gets out of Leo this time that maybe is a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, listen, one of the cool things about this film is there's a legacy aspect to it in terms of just from a pure filmmaking standpoint, the concept of the years that he spent with De Niro, 50 plus years now. And then you go into the relationship he has with DiCaprio, as you mentioned with The Aviator and Wolf and Gangs in New York. Weirdly enough, as you mentioned, it's something about his later films have just hit me a little differently. I know DiCaprio's not in Hugo, but Hugo to me it's just a film that I feel like he was meant to make. It's his love letter to cinema. I know that phrase is used a lot, but I just love that movie. But going back to the DiCaprio relationship, I think Aviator is a highly underrated film. I underrated, I guess, the term, because it did get a lot of critical acclaim and people did talk about it. I just don't think it comes up a lot in discussion about his filmography. A lot of it's Goodfellas and Raging Bull and Mean Streets and, of course, and Taxi Driver, Casino. Those are the ones that people think about the most. And then there's the ones that are, I think, a little bit more the outliers, like the Hugos and the Silence and things like that. Aviator had its due, though. It did well, and it was really well received. This movie, what I love about this film is the silence that it sits in. This is a movie that is fully aware that it gives itself time to breathe. There's a lot of just stillness in this movie that I think is powerful. And a master filmmaker like Scorsese has the ability to entertain in stillness in a way that is emotionally deep and really, really harrowing and very interesting to watch in terms of performance and cinematography. This is a story that, like Sean and I discussed on text, this could have been a great miniseries. You do feel the length of this, and it's interesting because, and again, I'm not trying to make comparisons to Oppenheimer. We're just talking primarily pacing and movement and how a film feels. I saw Oppenheimer 8 times. It feels like it's a 45-minute long film. You feel the 3.5 hours of Killers of the Flower Moon.
How long is Oppenheimer? Is it 240?
It's 3.
It's 3? Okay, yeah. So you're adding another 27
minutes. 27 minutes.
27 minutes?
It's 3 hours and 27 minutes or so.
Okay.
And so you do feel it, but I think the pacing is earned. Is it a film that I would want to sit down and watch over and over again? No, not necessarily, but that doesn't necessarily mean the movie isn't great. I mean, there's a lot of films that I wouldn't want to watch over and over again, like Schindler's List, or, like longer films that deal with very heavy subject matter. Even though Oppenheimer does deal with it, there's a musicality to the way that film moves. It's different, I felt. One thing I do love about the way this movie is designed, there's this recurring, I don't even know if it's a bass drum or a bass note that just goes throughout the film. It's almost like the heartbeat of the Osage. At least that's the way I took it. And there's just this heartbeat of a music, that aspect to it that really kind of kept the film flowing. And Robbie Robertson, obviously, he passed away recently, an incredible composer. But I also want to shout out Rod.
So good.
Incredible.
The score is so good in this movie.
And again, it's the subtlety of the score that I think is really great. And he does, and it's interesting, like the way the notes are used and the songs are used in the film. We know Scorsese is very good about in terms of narrative building with music and how he drops needle drops and things like that. But there's definitely a difference in this film and its vibe and its score and its music than there is to a lot of his earlier films.
Yeah, well, he couldn't do like the classic rock needle drops in this,
right?
know?
And then
like
weirdly enough, there is some rock music there. Like I think in the beginning, there's almost like this rock-ish guitar aspect to it that I thought was fascinating.
Great energy to it,
right? But it was not the music that I would have thought would be there. But it works perfectly. I also want to shout out Rodrigo Prieto. Dude shot Barbie and this, and they could not look more different. And a lot of this film was shot on 35 millimeter. It looks incredible. There's a lot of aspect ratio changes, which are really interesting in terms of the narrative aspect of the storytelling, performance wise. And then I'll let you guys jump in as well. De Niro and DiCaprio and Gladstone are obviously phenomenal. All three of them are incredible. They all carry their own weight. They're brilliant in the film. Going back to my first point about the stillness, what's great about this film is watching these massive, heavy-hitting actors just have dialogue in complete silence, just talking to each other. Like a scene with De Niro and DiCaprio just sitting down and talking for 5 to 6 minutes is so engaging and so interesting because the performances are so great. I think, there's a lot surrounding this film in terms of the conversation, the point of view that this film is presenting. And I think everybody should read up on the different sides of opinions in terms of how this film is being viewed, how it feels to the Osage, and how it feels, from that perspective as well. So I think everything is valid. Everybody needs to have their own perspective on it. As a person who just watched the movie and did not read the book and didn't know a ton about the story going in, I thought it's a really well made film. But I also understand the criticisms about the point of view aspect of it, and maybe giving a little more point of view to the Osage in the film rather than the DiCaprio character. But it is a really fascinating movie. And it's again, I do think it's a mini series type of film. I would love to have seen this stretched out more on the FBI aspect of it. But performance wise and filmmaking wise, score, cinematography, it's incredible. It's an incredible film from a filmmaking standpoint.
I want to build on that aspect that Kev brought up, because that was my my biggest critique of it as soon as I came out of it, is that it felt like it should have been a limited series. Yeah. And I just want to talk about the length. Like a 3.5 hour movie is asking a lot of an audience. Like that is a serious time commitment, that when you are committing to going to the theater and buying in for that story, it's hard for me not to look back on it after the fact and think, like, did you make the best use of your time? And when we get into the spoilers, I'll start to talk about a few aspects of the overall story that I felt were a little bit underserved because of the amount of attention that was given to other aspects of the story. And again, I'll hide this behind the spoiler conversation. But I feel like, because now we're so spoiled on prestige television, that had Martin Scorsese been given more time to do the 6-hour version of this story, but broke it up into 1-hour chunks, I think it would have allowed him to even drill down further into some of the aspects of the story that I kind of wish were explored. Now, he decided to make it as a feature film. Of course, that's his decision. He has, of course, the flexibility and him being a master, that if he says to a studio, it's going to be 3.5 hours, they essentially say, okay, great, then deliver the 3.5 hour project as soon as you're finished with it. And we will release it in that format. I give him, all the credit in the world, and I'm glad he got to release his version of it. I just left it a little bit torn in that there was more that I wanted to know. So I would kind of advise people to read up on this before you go into it, because there are a lot of characters and a lot of story elements that I think Scorsese does a good job of setting up big chunks of it. But then I think he speeds through other chunks of it, and this will make more sense when I'm able to get into the spoiler aspect of it. So I came out of the film saying that I liked it, was never bored by it, and I think obviously from a technical standpoint, it's incredibly well made. Obviously, it's Scorsese. I'm one of those guys who kind of craps on DiCaprio every once in a while, like. I don't love him, and sometimes it's really hard for me to not see Leonardo DiCaprio like in his performances. That's why the fact that he got recognized for The Revenant, I was really happy for, because I kind of don't see him in The Revenant. In Wolf of Wall Street, he's just Leo. He does something in this movie though that is so incredibly different. In that he's not. I don't know.
It's his mouth. It's the mouth. Like it,
well,
like
no.
it's
I'm
literally
talking
the
about
mouth.
the character. Like, is calling the character a loser too much? I mean, he's kind of being manipulated by Robert De Niro's character. So I mean, it's like.
That's maybe a harsher word, but I get at what I think you're.
Dim is the adjective that I would use.
Oh,
dim-witted kind of guy.
Okay, yeah. And you don't see him playing that. Normally he's the authoritative.
Yeah.
The biggest guy in the room.
There's a moment where his character literally has to say, "I'm smart. I'm smart." And anytime you have to say that, you're usually not.
And so I loved that. I loved seeing him explore an aspect of his character that I don't normally get a chance to see, and was really fascinated by how that went. But ultimately, when I look at the film as a whole, and I'll describe a little bit more when we get into the spoilers, I'm in the liked it, didn't love it camp. And I've said this to the guys in the text thread since, like, when Oppenheimer finished, and I don't want to keep using Oppenheimer as the benchmark to compare it to, but it is the long, Oscar contender from another master that was released this year. When Oppenheimer ended, I was like, damn, I want to see that again now. Play it, I'll sit here. And when Killers of the Flower Moon ended, I was like, oh, okay, I'm glad I saw it, but I probably don't ever have to see it again. I had a very similar reaction to Silence. I thought Silence was magnificent while I was watching it. I have not been compelled to basically throw it on since. And I think that's kind of the case with some of Scorsese's movies. It's probably the case with like multiple directors where I'm glad I saw it and I'm glad that he got the opportunity to make the version of the film that he wanted to see. But, you know, there's other sort of stone cold masterpieces that I could put on a loop. And I don't think The Flower Moon is one of those. And honestly, it's the length that's a big part of the reason. Jakey, when you weighed in on it, you thought it would make your top 10. Is it still something that you think would make your top 10?
Yeah, I mean, it's top 5. I really did love this film. Sean, one of the things I told you was that when it comes to, and I hate that we have these conversations and then immediately go to, okay, whatever, it's Oscar chances, but it's just that time of year. It's just the conversations that we have.
It's the business we work in. I mean, it is. Yeah.
And here's the thing is that Lily Gladstone is so unbelievably good. But what I've been telling people is that she doesn't really have what I call that Oscar moment, you know, where you go, oh, that's the clip that they're going to show at the Oscars. But it's still a testament to her performance in that the sort of moments that other people would have that would be the scene chewy, the yelling, the screaming, the crying, the clawing at the walls. Like she experiences those things, but she's got to keep it inside. So I'm picturing sort of the quote unquote, the cliche Oscar moment that, look, I love a good scene chewy Oscar moment. I don't mean to call them cliche. Like I love those moments, but that's not who her character is. That's not how her character behaved. I mean, even when we meet her, you can tell when she meets Ernest, the character played by DiCaprio, that the wheels are turning. Like who she's going, who is this guy? You know, he offers to give her a ride and he instantly kind of starts flirting with her. And you can tell she doesn't trust a lot of people, and rightfully so. So from that moment, you can already tell that her performance is hidden behind layers of protection, which I feel like in a way almost makes it harder because I feel that yelling and screaming and crying and clawing and I feel the Oscar moment without getting to see it. And so I hope that other people see that in her performance. Going back to the length, I want to touch on some of the things you guys touched on. I've been sort of coupling this by saying, yes, it feels like a 3.5 hour movie. It does. There isn't a minute that I would cut, though. It's not one of those situations where I go, yeah, somewhere in there is a really tight, great 2.5 hour. No, like this movie needs to be 2.5. In fact, do you agree
it needs more? Would you argue it needs more?
Yeah,
I would have stayed.
You can shift things.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, sure,
FBI,
absolutely.
Would
this be? I mean, but like, there are so many movies that we could watch and go, yeah, man, I really would like. I would have loved to see The Creator as a miniseries. That would have been fantastic. Like, I think it's one of those things where, and we talk about this a lot, you got to judge it for what it is, you know, and when you look at it from, like, it's based on the book, but it is also so wildly different from the book. I mean, it covers a lot of the things that happen in the book, but, you know, as you guys know, the book is from the perspective of the FBI comes to town. It's from Jesse Plemons' perspective. Is it really? Who
kidding.
DiCaprio was originally going to play. And they really had to go learn a lot more. You know, there's a lot of conversation about sort of making the point of view DiCaprio and was he given too much sympathy? But Scorsese has said that whenever he met with the Osage tribe, that one of the points that they needed to make sure that he was aware of was he loved her. Like he did, this guy who did these terrible things, they were in love, which to me makes the story all the more interesting. I don't think it makes it sympathetic. It adds this really great moral quandary that Scorsese's known for of then how could you do this? Like if it would be so much easier to understand if he were more like De Niro's character and just doing this for the head rights, just doing this for the money. But the fact that, and I really did start to feel like, because I kept, even though, you know, and Kevin talks a lot about this, knowing what something's going to happen, but hoping it turns out differently. Even though I knew what the end of this story was, there's a part of me that just goes, dude, wise up, man. Like you do love this woman. Like but like that, doesn't that make it all the more interesting that like I was convinced of their love? Like I do believe he actually did love his life and loved her and loved the family that they created, which then begs that big, massive, interesting question that it does take 3.5 hours to answer, which is then how the hell do you do something like this? It's,
Right, but to
it's-
Sean's point, though, I would just add to what you're saying. Like the manipulation of the De Niro character it's exactly what Jake is saying. That's why it's interesting because DiCaprio throughout the film, and this is not a spoiler, but the basic premise of the story is he goes to work for his uncle, and his uncle clearly has some type of like gangster lifestyle that he's dealing with, and the way Scorsese, at least Jake, I think you agree, the way Scorsese directs this, DiCaprio is kind of like a fish out of water, kind of enters this story, doesn't necessarily know the world he's entering,
Right.
and De Niro's just slowly peeling the layers away and manipulating him in a way that drives him, but the things that DiCaprio does are absolutely
they're unforgivable.
Unforgivable. Yeah.
But Sean, really quick, you said something that I thought was really interesting, which my following statement, because Sean, you said something about like, oh yeah, is very well made as Scorsese movies are.
Sure.
But like, and this is going to sound absolutely ridiculous, but like there is a degree that sometimes I just feel like we sleep on the greatness of Scorsese because he is so consistently great.
Like
I think of it as like, or even we've talked in weeks past about like someone like Tom Hanks and why Tom Hanks doesn't get Oscar nominations. It's because he's always great. I think of it as like the equivalent of like a single nail versus a bed of nails. Like a single nail, you step on it, it goes through your foot, it hurts really bad. It's just one single nail. But a bed of nails, you can lay your entire body on and just lay on. And I think because Scorsese's filmography is nothing but a masterpiece after masterpiece, an entire bed of nail of just incredible films, that it's just, we forget that it's even there. It doesn't have as much of an impact as opposed to if like a new filmmaker made this exact film, we'd all be losing our shit.
Jake, when you write the career retrospective on Scorsese, I want you to call it a bed of nails.
It sounds ridiculous, but like, does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes sense.
Like,
it's just a very sharp
but it's just
analogy.
like everything about this film is at an 11. I think the writing, like Eric Roth and Scorsese's screenplay is phenomenal. Like it's some of De Niro's best work in 30 years. I think it's one of DiCaprio's best performances. We were just shown a newcomer who has a chance to be like an all-time great with Lily Gladstone. Like Scorsese, 80 years old, directing this thing like he's 20 years old. Like everything about this film is fucking top notch. Like it's just, and I feel like it's just, we're going to just sleep on it. It's just because, that's what we expect out of Scorsese. You start delivering the impossible and it becomes part of your job description.
Well, let me push back on that slightly from this aspect. It's not like Scorsese's going to forget how to make a good movie. You know, like it's to the point where we've seen him make enough outstanding movies that even if dude's on autopilot, it's largely going to be better than other people who are given
like
it a
he
shot.
kind of was it the GQ article where he kind of slighted Shutter Island and is like, dude, like the movies that you slight in your career are better than most directors' best work.
Sure, but I didn't come out of Flower Moon blown away by his camera work, or like you didn't get a Copa, unbroken shot where you came out of it and you were just like I thought the way that he expanded his lens to capture Oklahoma, because I think this is a New York native who gets turned loose in one of the most beautiful, open areas of our country. I thought his production value to create the historical aspects of it. Like,
I gotta push back on that for a second. The silhouette of the fire reminded me of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Or the two cars. It's in the trailer, but the shot of the two cars in the wheat.
I kind of want to. I would love to know if Scorsese, when him and Rodrigo, if we get Rodrigo Prieto on the show, when they were framing the shot of the silhouette of the fire, if they thought of Raiders, because it looked like the shot.
Oh, you're talking about that wavy? Is it the wavy kind of?
Yeah. It's like they're like almost shadow characters, and it's like the fire's burning. Yeah. It reminded me of the shot in Raiders when he.
It's like working through silhouettes. But I'm glad you mentioned that. I kind of forgot about that. While that shot was happening, I literally thought, I don't know if I've ever seen this shot.
Yeah, true.
Like I was like, I don't know if I've ever seen this shot, and this is incredible.
Wild.
Like this is incredible.
Yeah. Well, the shot, it's in the trailer, but the shot of when the oil blew and the slow motion of the Native Americans dancing in the fall. Like I was just like, gee, like
we're talking opening 5 minutes. We're talking that shot's in the opening 5 minutes, right? I mean, arguably. And I was like, are we going to get this for the rest of the 3 hours? And it turns out we didn't. It became a little bit more pedestrian.
Okay. There's a couple.
Push back on that.
I gotta push back on that. Yeah, Prieto, dude. There's a oneer in this movie, and it might have been just so subtle, like it might have just blown by. But like, there's a oneer, and this is not a spoiler at all. But there's a character who wakes up on a porch and walks into a house, and you follow the. I mean, it's an incredible
there's your Copacabana.
oneer. That's a hell of a oneer. Now,
but let me.
I also want to give the shout out to the crane shots, though, man. Like when DiCaprio arrives. And they push in on him, and then he's getting off the train. It's really cool stuff.
But like, remember when we saw the first saw the trailer for West Side Story, and there was the shot of the shadows of the sharks and the jets combining, and it's just Spielberg essentially dropping it on the desk and saying like, "This is what I can do."
He gave me a really great answer about the thematic of why he does.
He did.
He's like it's a really cool shot, of course, but like thematically, the characters are all coming together on an even playing field, and you just see their shadows. It's cool.
Yeah,
I think that's the way I want to push back on that is I think that's clearly a different film, but I think that the lack of the flashiness that you're talking about is a part of the language that the film establishes. And I don't want to get too, maybe this is better for spoilers just because I don't know how many people want to know details, but very early on, there's a line that to me establishes the language of the film. And it's when De Niro is talking about don't talk so much around the Osage. He said they don't talk much, but it doesn't mean they don't know everything that's going on. And in that moment, he explains the people, but he very much explains Gladstone's character. And to me, while the movie is not told from Gladstone's point of view, it is told through her perspective, and that we are very silently and very still watching what is happening. And there's a lot of free space that you guys are talking about that reflects her character sitting in silence when someone says something and thinking that through. And to me, I think that's reflected in the sort of pulled back, simple, still style of the cinematography.
Interesting. Okay.
I just got chills because Gabe kind of hit on something, like my hair on my arms is standing up a little bit. So when you're dealing with these sequences, as Gabe's talking about, of the stillness and the silence with Lily Gladstone's character, what's fascinating about sitting in those moments, like there are scenes where characters pass away or something happens to a character, and we'll just sit in silence during a moment and you're breathing with the characters. And I think what's interesting about it is there were so many times where I wanted to jump into the screen and help Lily's character and help people who were being wronged. Like there was so like, and I think Scorsese, I can't say that he intended this, but there's almost a way for the audience to kind of go, like you kind of want to shout at them, at the characters on screen and say, don't do this, don't do that. Why are you doing this? Why aren't we helping like Lily's character? Like I won't go into spoilers, but like, man, there's just so many times I want to jump in the screen and just help her and say something to somebody. And I think that's what the key to the great filmmaking is that he's making you think that you somehow can jump in there and change this story. And he's giving that silence. And I think this is more of like, no, let me put you in this. And then I want you to sit here and feel every aspect of this moment. And I think that's where the length is justified. To
your point, there's a plot point, without getting away, that a murder has to be committed a certain way. Right. And it doesn't. And a tighter film would go from it not being committed the way it was supposed to De Niro finding out and being super pissed. And in a way, because there is that time and because a little time passes before it even becomes an issue, what I think is probably about 15, 20 minutes later, it almost lulls you into a sense of like ease, like, OK, like not ease, because obviously you don't want them to get away with it, but like you sort of forget in the same way that DiCaprio's character has forgotten. DiCaprio's character forgot that it was even a thing. And then all of a sudden De Niro pulls up and he's spitfire pissed about this thing that happened a while back. And you're like, oh my God, like in the same way that DiCaprio sort of jarled, like, oh my God, like I forgot that was even a thing. I forgot that was even an issue. And like, oh, it kind of like puts you in that same, like it's an ebb and flow of anxiety and relaxation. I thought, honestly, I for a 3.5 hour, I know people scoff at when a long film gets editing nominations, but I think it's all the more impressive for a 3.5 hour film because here's the thing. I think there's a difference between it feels 3.5 hours versus it's slow. It's not slow.
No, it's
and
not
I was never bored.
You just feel the length.
You just feel the length.
Yeah.
Look, it's a hard movie to watch in a lot of ways.
It is.
Like,
It is.
That's where it comes from.
Because it's only 14 minutes longer than Avatar: The Way of Water. But the difference being that because Avatar: The Way of Water was like 3:15, or it was a little bit over.
Talk about should have been a miniseries.
So, but like, because that movie was so like, big explosions, loud and everything. Like, it didn't feel that way. It's a movie like this was never going to fly by fast. It just wasn't.
As you can tell, it's difficult for us to talk about Flower Moon without getting into specifics. So let's throw it to a real quick break and then come back on the other side where we can do a full on spoiler segment for people to come back and listen to after you have seen the entirety of Killer of the Flower Moon. Okay, fair warning. You are now in the spoiler-filled conversation section of Killers of the Flower Moon, where we're going to get into some specifics about the film. And so hopefully you've seen it if you're listening at this point. Jake, you wanted to get into an aspect of the movie that we can talk about in depth now.
For sure. And I think, in regards to talking about the length and whether or not it feels wrong, I think it's going to come down to how people feel about the last half hour. Okay. Because the last half hour, correct me if you think I'm wrong, is, I think, pretty wildly different than the rest of the movie, because it basically involves DiCaprio being caught, the investigation that sort of starts surrounding it, the trial of whether or not the FBI, the newly established FBI, can sway DiCaprio, Ernest, into testifying against his uncle, William K. Hale. And that's a pretty wildly different film than the previous 3 hours that we've been given. It almost to a certain degree feels like an epilogue. It kind of like if you were in, this sounds weird, just read the book of this film, that sounds like what would be kind of like the, hey, here's kind of how it all sort of wrapped up at the end.
Sure.
And I think that, I loved that. I liked that part of it. I liked that investigation part of it. I'm glad that it made me more appreciative that wasn't the entirety of the film. That the whole film wasn't this guy in the white hat showing up to town and doing the investigation, because
what would that have been? Would that have just been like flashbacks from The Stand? Like this is what happened, and then I guess, or like a 3 hour version of the scene with Jesse Plemons and DiCaprio on the porch when he's like, oh, what do you hear? Also, we didn't talk about this in spoiler free. Jesse Plemons doesn't miss.
He was
Jesse
great. Plemons is
so great.
He was underutilized though. I wanted more of that character.
That's a lot of where I agree with Sean on. I wish I had more. And potentially make it a series, is because I would have loved to live with the FBI story longer.
Well, and let me take it from the way that Jake just framed it, because you say that that last 30 minutes feels like an epilogue, but to me it's the inevitable second half of the story. Like, if we spend all this time going through these murders and setting up why the murders happened, and even taking the time, the 3 hours, to live in the ramifications of these murders on the Osage community, and especially Molly specifically, because you feel the weight of every death, the way Kevin was talking about, the way that the pain of each of those deaths. What you kind of wait for is the second half of the story, which is someone having to pay for it, right? Like, there should be some justice, there should be some retribution, and in this case, it comes through the FBI coming in and investigating. And I felt that aspect of it was so rushed because the previous bit got so much attention and so much room to breathe. And that's why I was saying, if this movie, if the story itself were 6 hours, I hate to keep harping on that, you could give the second half, the criminal aspect of it, the trial aspect of it, as much attention as the previous part got. Or if you're going to tell it in one sitting, shorten one and give the other one a little bit more. I don't think it's balanced. And personally, I just wanted it to be a little bit more balanced, because I did find the court case and the way that the FBI was trying these new interrogation tactics and what you saw, because we're in spoilers now, they do this with all these gangster cases. You get a low level guy and he rats out the next level up. And then you get that level person to rat out. And they finally get to the point where Ernest is trapped. He essentially has to go on the record to get the uncle, because they're going after the uncle. that the pacing of that felt like I was like, what, you got to slow, like what's going on here? Because so much of it was breathing in the beginning. And I thought a lot of that stuff was too quick.
I actually agree with that. I mean, I think that I love the FBI aspect of the story, but that needed to breathe. Like everything else was able to breathe, but that was very fast. And again, but a lot happens in that moment too. And since we're in spoilers, you know, this is also the part of the film where DiCaprio is slowly killing Lily Gladstone's character with the insulin injections mixed with whatever poison that was slowing her down. And that goes back to my statement earlier about Lily's face and her reactions. And as she gets more and more towards death, just the life being sucked out of that face. Like if you go back to the beginning when DiCaprio picks her up for the first time and he says that joke about being like devilishly handsome or whatever, and she laughs, like she was so full of life at that point, but also skeptical about what was going on around her and like who was coming into, you know,
I mean,
to
her
essentially
even
take
asking,
the money.
do you want to come in for supper? Like you just felt like it probably took so much for her to get there to bring herself to a point of trust where she said, okay, all right, I'm going to invite this guy in. Which makes it even more heartbreaking, you know, that he was administering this poison to her that was slowly killing her. But like there was this weird cut at one point where we cut to the FBI like in a field in their cars, and they're circled around and they're waiting for something. They look off in the corner and they see the fire. And I remember that edit. I was like, how did they even get out there? I know it's an edit in a film, but like everything just felt like it was like towards the end was just being pushed very quickly to get to the narrative, to get to that court case.
Let's not even talk about Molly going to Washington, D.C. and meeting the president in like a 5 minutes.
I was going to say the most truncated probably part of the story.
And that's the scene that theoretically would have been the bridge that eventually got the FBI there, right? Because I mean, like it's probably the most important, one of the most important narrative part. And I thought it was interesting that Scorsese didn't show the president's face. It was from behind. I actually thought that was a really interesting and very well made choice.
I like when people make that choice just because it's always, you have to cast somebody, then you have to make, and then it becomes, I think about it.
And it's so quick. And you're right, though, that moment when but maybe now that I'm thinking about it, maybe the reason why Scorsese did that scene so quickly is because that's probably how it happened. Like, maybe, again, I don't know the reality of it, but maybe there's a picture. Maybe it was so.
Really?
But maybe
interesting.
But maybe it was such a minimal moment in terms of time frame. Maybe it was that quick. Maybe she literally went up, said that to him, and then boom, and then the FBI shows up.
It's still done very quickly within the movie. Yeah, regardless of the interaction itself, like he could have made that a sequence of her journey there, and
I would like to have seen. Yeah, that you're right. Like it almost felt like at first when they cut to that scene, I'm like, wait, is she in DC? Oh, she's with the president. And it took me a second to to think about it, but it's like you're right. Like Sean, like now that I'm thinking about it more, you're right. It's like the first third of first 2/3 of the film, it breathes beautifully, like the stillness and just sitting in it. And then you're right, it just kind of just like ramps up.
3/4 of the film, really.
But see, that's interesting because I feel like it almost kind of reminded me of like the last 30 minutes of Goodfellas is him becoming this like paranoid drug addict where,
but Goodfellas already has a pacing to it, though. It already has like a fascinating like musicality, like not that this one doesn't.
This is what I was saying to you guys is one of the things about Scorsese that I've kind of realized after watching this movie is with Goodfellas, with Casino to a certain extent, with Wolf definitely, and with this movie, I feel like Scorsese he's just as a storyteller not inherently interested in the law enforcement aspect that brings down the people who he's more interested in spending time with, which is this gangster element, and these people who are doing morally horrific things and then have to be conflicted by it. He wants to tell that side of the story.
He's the anti-Aaron Sorkin.
Sean wanted more Sacha Baron Cohen and Hugo. He really wanted a guy working at the train station being like, you can't live here.
If Scorsese did The Untouchables, we would have gotten like 2 scenes with Sean Connery, essentially. And it would have just been De Niro the entire time with a baseball bat, which again that's okay if you want to make that choice. It never struck me until watching this how much I realized that he rushes through the aspects of oh, you're getting caught, or your criminal aspect is falling. And in Wolf, it bothered me in Wolf. There's the exact moment when DiCaprio meets Kyle Chandler on the boat and essentially, taunts him, and says and I thought at that point that the movie was going to shift perspective and follow Kyle Chandler and show you how he brought down Jordan Belfort. And it didn't. It continued to follow DiCaprio and keep going over all the excess that Jordan was living through. And so when the FBI kind of got sidelined in this movie, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. As a storyteller, Scorsese's he doesn't seem to be interested in that.
And it's an interesting point, and I hadn't really thought about it. In Wolf, it didn't bother me. It didn't really bother me in Goodfellas either. I thought Goodfellas, it made sense. Here was the first time I can actually see that point. But also, it's interesting. I mean, I while we're having this discussion, I would like to have seen more perspective from the Osage, Molly, and the FBI. I think those perspectives were a little... Molly's character does have a lot of emotional screen time and very important aspects to it, more so than the FBI does. But I still wanted more from both those sides.
Her Oscar clip to me seems when the house blows up and DiCaprio stands at the top of the stairs and they're all in the basement and he has to basically indicate to her that her sister has been killed and she has that wailing. I kind of think that's what they're going to show.
Yeah, that's a big moment. I wanted to say, while we're talking about, we talk about the length, and I sent this to you guys as soon as I got out. But I think that, there's movies with really good exposition where you're like, yeah, it flowed, it felt natural, and it got me to the point that we needed to get to, and it set the pace. It lets you pick up the pace when you can just say, this is happening and this is why. And then there's bad exposition that says, this is happening and this is why, and it feels like I'm doing it that way, Right. I mentioned that I think this movie earns its length by the fact that I've only seen it once. I think it is completely devoid of exposition. This movie, there
is one major exposition moment that really works.
Let me finish my point though. This goes back to what I was saying about how I think it's not told from Molly's point of view, but it is told through her perspective. And I feel like that lack of exposition is very much telling you in the audience, pay attention. This guy shows up and you go, is he a distant relative? Is he going to mess up is he going to stake a claim? Is he an FBI? Oh, he's with the FBI. You're sitting there and it's just somebody's here and the camera's going to follow him more than you think. So pay attention. This is going to happen. Are they or aren't they? Is there a conspiracy? It just lets stuff happen and you really have to just pay attention and let it unfold. And I thought that was...
that is my concern for people who do choose to wait and watch it at home. Inevitably over watching at home over the course of 3.5 hours, people are going to do what a lot of us do, which is you pick up your phone. And it's not a pick up your phone. No. I was grateful to be in a Dolby theater where people were forced to put their phone down for 3.5, as tough as it was, for 3.5 hours and just kind of focus. So here's what I would say is that if you're in a city, if you're in a market, I'd like to think it's going to be playing near you. It's his widest theatrical release of his career, hopefully. But if you don't have the chance to get out there and see it and you do wait for streaming, treat it like a theatrical experience, kind of, if you can. I saw a meme one time that's so true, which is this, does the movie not make sense or were you on your phone? and that's sort of a point someone brought up on Twitter that I love. Because don't forget, this is a $200 million movie. And honestly, I do think it looks like a $200 million movie. Yeah. Someone said, when needed to, when making his passion project, when making The Last Temptation of Christ, Scorsese can squeeze the hell out of every penny of $4 million. But when Apple gives him $200 million, he is spending every freaking dollar of that. And he got there is no question of watching that movie and asking where did 200 million, sometimes you see the big superhero movies and you go, really? That cost $300 million? Yeah. No, you spent $200 million. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Also, Gabe, what were you gonna add? Oh, sorry, Kev. I know Gabe wanted to.
There's just a couple things I wanted to point out before we close out that I wanted to ask you guys about. But go ahead, Gabe.
I was just gonna add to your exposition thing, unless that's where you're going again.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I just didn't want. I wanted to mention this because we used to talk about exposition a lot in our threads, and I jokingly make fun of the MCU, the television series, and how the exposition on those shows is just, it's really like they're over explaining the storylines that we already know from movies, just in case audiences had forgotten them or whatever. And I just find that to be bad storytelling. and Gabe's 100% right. What's cool about this film is it's fully understanding that the audience is smart, and like to a point where the way the camera moves, like we'll be in a scene and Rodrigo Prieto will like hand the camera real quick to like change your perspective on the view, and it's because of like it's because almost like you're trying to understand where you are. You are DiCaprio's character, like essentially in a way, like you come into this story and you're learning through him. I would argue is kind of like the way Scorsese has designed it. But there's a great exposition scene, to Gabe's point, where exposition is done right. And when he gets there, his uncle gives him the books to read about the Osage and learning about it.
Oh, right.
And,
Yeah.
and DiCaprio reads these books narration wise.
Reminded me of
like,
Dune.
Right. And that's kind of where was that the first trailer that came out for this, where he's like, can you see the wolves in this picture? And I always love the way that trailer used that.
Yeah.
But in the way it's done in the movie, it's part of the history lesson he's learning. So basically what's cool about that moment is we're learning the Osage history while he's learning the Osage history, but it makes perfect sense in the context of the world. We're not just being told that. And I always think of Terminator.
And he's not sitting in a chair saying it. It's over a montage of the
Correct.
story still unfolding around you. I mean,
Right.
again, he's a master. We don't have to explain that, but it's so good.
But I do feel, to Gabe's point, it is a bigger picture thing that you need to trust your audience. Like when Plemons shows up, we don't have to state on screen. Like, remember in Lincoln, he kept like saying on the screen it would be like captions of who the person was. And I was
My
like,
favorite use of that is
like a
actually
history
Scorsese.
lesson.
Remember in The Irishman, whenever it would like label each person, but then tell you how they died.
That's funny.
Remember, because it would be like shot in the head
That's
6
funny.
times, and I loved that.
That's
That's
good.
smart.
I did want to mention before, because we also want to talk about the ending. One note I just feel like I have to say, because I thought it was brilliant. Again, who needs to explain Scorsese as a master? But I think one way this movie would have been very different if a younger or less experienced filmmaker had made it is I think they would have gotten bogged down in the just how melancholic and awful the story is, because it is, and the story doesn't shy away from it. I mean, you leave this feeling, oh my gosh, like just it's one terrible thing happening after another. Awful. But the masterful thing that I think Scorsese does, because he understands what he's doing to his audience in the moment. In the beginning of the film, it's more about the love story, and he finds ways to make you think that maybe DiCaprio's going to change and save the day, and maybe her love will win, and that'll be how this resolves. And then later, when it gets after that's kind of more complicated, he's able to find humor. Like he has that moment where the guy walks in and DiCaprio goes, "Can I talk to this man alone for a while?" Like, I was like, but
it's very funny.
You needed it, because it's just like, oh my God, this is awful. And it's nothing but awful.
Or when he's getting arrested and he's like, I'm going to walk away here, go home with my son and go say hi to my family. Like,
I think a younger filmmaker would have just said, yeah, this is a serious story and I want you to leave this being as intense as possible. I think Scorsese gets like, no, you'll feel how serious it is, but I'm going to bring you back up so that I can bring you back down. And I thought
what's
that
really
was
funny?
Great.
When DiCaprio gets time to meet with that guy, I assumed that the FBI agents were listening in.
Oh, the whole time I was waiting for that cut to the other side where they're just sitting there.
But apparently it was so innocent back then that the FBI was like, yeah, you can go talk to that guy.
What could you two also like possibly be talking about?
Yeah.
Also, we gotta bring up the violence, by the way. And what's interesting about the way Scorsese does violence, and he doesn't shy away from it, obviously, you know, look at Taxi Driver and things like that. What's shocking about this film is how the violence just happens like completely out of nowhere. Like he'll have a scene where characters are just walking and all of a sudden the guy pulls out a gun and shoots him.
It's emotionless, which is, I think, is the what these killers are, is what they're emotionless.
But the woman who got shot in the chest by her baby, that's when I and that one, I think it happened. There were probably like 30 murders prior to that one. And by that one, I was kind of like, it's beyond desensitized. I don't know how much more I can take. I'm watching people just get murdered on screen. Like it's really rough.
I think he did it that way because it got to a point where so many people were being killed, to your point, kind of, that it was almost as if like, it meant nothing to the person who was killing them. They were just like, and I think the way Scorsese, like going back to what Gabe said just now, if a younger filmmaker had approached this, I think that they would have played with maybe the intensity of building up a moment like that or showing the violence in a different way. He just shows it as the way he shows the violence in this film is the way it would happen in real life. You would just be like looking at the world and all of a sudden something horrible would happen in front of you. And I think it's the non-buildup of it and the shocking nature of the way it just happens nonchalantly that made it so horrifying. Like you gasp when someone gets killed because it's not that, the violence itself and the murder itself is already horrifying enough, but it's the way it happens.
Well, and it gets easier for DiCaprio's character to just go to the bad element of town and find somebody to say like, hey, I need this done, get it done. It becomes...
It kind of reminded me of like a gambling addict in a casino. He just keeps thinking, okay, well, if I just double down here, then I'm in the hole. But if I just put 200, that's sort of how he kind of felt like with him in violence. He became so desensitized to it. And he thought, okay, if I just kill these 2 more people, then I can get out of it. Then I'll be out of this. And I'll get out. And it just kept getting worse. He kept digging himself into a hole more and more. Before we wrap up, I would like to discuss what is, I guess, the last 90 seconds of the film, which is basically sort of an onstage, radio show,
teleplay,
depicting
right?
Teleplay, exactly, sort of depicting what happened, and what I love about that, I think it's going to throw off a lot of people, but I think the last line that is read by Martin Scorsese,
so strange,
in which I love it. I did a rewatch of a lot of his. He's in a lot more of his movies than we think he is.
Did you hear Scorsese's voice in the middle of the film?
Oh, where is he in the middle?
I don't know why I didn't bring this up earlier. In the middle of Killers of the Flower Moon, you hear Scorsese's voice off camera.
Oh, wait, yeah, he's whenever they go visit the president.
And that, I think that implies that the entire film is being told through that teleplay. I think.
Yeah, that's one of those it doesn't make a difference in the story, but it's like maybe.
Listen and you hear his voice. Yeah.
What I like about it is we just saw this massive, heartbreaking, just the kind of story where you look at America's history and go, how the hell could this happen? And then very similar to how I felt when I learned about Tulsa only through Watchmen, the series, where you just sort of go, how the hell do I not know this? How is this not taught in every American history class in this country? And when you saw just how this tragedy was reduced to a stage radio production of whistles and bells and sound effects and things that made people laugh,
which is a bit of self-awareness of what the movie is itself.
Oh, exactly. And then the last line, which is Scorsese reading the obituary for Molly, in which he says, in the obituary, it listed X, Y, and Z about her. The murders were never mentioned. Right. And that's how the movie ends. And you just go,
that's the point of the movie.
Shit. That's it. Exactly. So I actually loved that it kind of just said, because you should be asking yourself, how do I not know this story? And to me, that last 90 seconds tells you why. It goes, because this is how the story was told to people. It was reduced down. It was watered down. And even in the concrete, legacy of someone's obituary, one of the most important thing that happened to them wasn't mentioned.
Wasn't even mentioned.
That's how you don't know this story. Cut to black. I thought that was phenomenal. I'm sure this is how you guys felt about it.
That last shot when we're above. Yeah. And it's just what a beaut was that present day?
Oh, that shot is magnificent.
It felt like the end of how Schindler's List ends and it's them and it felt like a similar modern day memorial.
Oh,
type.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was modern day because I kept wondering are we in present because the tone of that shot was different than the rest of the film.
It looked more Technicolor, it looked more or brighter.
Yeah. I think that's kind of, you're right. I think dude, you're so right about Schindler's List. That's the second Spielberg thing that I'm curious now to ask Scorsese. The Raiders shot and the silhouette with the fire. And then I wonder if that was.
So he's just ripping off Spielberg is what we're saying?
No, but they are interesting to think about thematically. And this
imagine De Niro as Indiana Jones now.
Yeah. Well, do you remember BlacKkKlansman and how that film went on in its time period, and then the part of the film was like modern day news footage. And like, again,
it's a powerful way to connect
stories.
it to you now. I think it's a powerful way to say, hey, this isn't make believe. This is a real story we're trying to tell.
When I saw Black Klansman and he cut to present day footage after telling a story that took place decades prior, I was like, I mean,
it was like footage like ripped right from the headlines. It was like
the Charlottesville
riots that were happening.
It was a wild,
very contemporary
jump.
stuff.
To what Jake was getting at the ending, it is a wild ending, and I think I texted you, Jake, right after, and I was like, I don't have anything to say bad about it that I dislike it. I don't have anything to say like, wow, this is why I love it. It just is like so different and interesting, and I've been unpacking it, and hearing you talk about it also is helping me learn new things about it. It's one of those things where you were talking about, giving him flowers, no pun intended. Yeah. And that's something that someone at that level can do, is they can give you that Babylon type ending of like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this.
And I'm really glad that, one of the downsides of our industry and what we do is that we so quickly have to give our reactions and our thoughts and our reviews so immediately after seeing. I mean, for those of you who don't know, a lot of times when we go to screenings, and I get it, it's their job. It's I'm not faulting them, but there's oftentimes someone literally waiting outside the door that needs to write down your reaction, send it to the studio. And
happened on this one.
Yeah, it happened on this one. And so I'm really glad that we all had a couple of days, almost a week, to sort of think about it. And I've really enjoyed this episode and really enjoyed, because, a lot of times we don't have time to get into it in the way that we do, or we haven't all four seen it in this way. And I was glad that we had a week to sort of let it sit with us. And I feel like I wouldn't have been able to get out everything that in the same way that I'm sure that if I rewatch it in a year from now, I'd be able to give a different review than I'm able to give now. But this is not a movie that I hope anyone feels the need to give a knee-jerk reaction online to the moment after you see it. Like, let it sit for a second, let it sink.
If you guys are cool with it, I'm going again tomorrow night. One of my best friends from college really wanted to see it, and I was like, let's go see it in IMAX. And I know it wasn't shot in the IMAX format, but sure. I'm very interested to sit down, knowing what I know, knowing how the pacing is, knowing how it goes, and then just taking a step back and going, okay, all right, let me just experience this without like any type of like critical mindset. I just want to watch it and just
pay really close attention to the opening speech about the pipe that they're burying. I think that there's probably something really significant to that, because they talk about, I can't remember specifically, but I thought it was like, we're burying this, and it has these stories and these lessons.
Is that right? Okay.
That it's bringing with it. I'm sure there has to be some deeper significance to what's
I am curious about that. In the moment, I thought that was like this is just in the moment and not knowing, being ignorant to what that might be. I got the sense that it was like a way of mourning a body that you don't have, like when they bury an empty casket. Yeah. That's the feeling I had for some reason. Yeah. But again, that was 4 hours before the end of it. Yeah. So I don't know that I have a clear view of it. But by
digging that hole to bury it, I thought that's how they discovered the oil. Just from a narrative perspective.
That is how it's edited.
I just thought those were like kind of smash cut. Yeah, I didn't really tie those together. No,
and there's a really.
I mean, you say how you're not going to see it. Like I want to watch it again. If I lived in DC, I'd go with Kevin tomorrow night. Like I want to see it now that I sort of know what it is, and I'm not sort of like watching it to see what the next scene's going to be. I do want to watch it again.
And in that scene that Sean's talking about, and then I want Jake to plug something, but there's a shot in that scene we were talking earlier about cinematography, because I think there's a lot of great shots in this film. But there's the scene that Sean's referring to. Pay attention to the shot of the kids who are looking into that moment.
Oh yeah, that's
really. It almost looks like a split diopter.
It does,
but I think and it's a really interesting shot. It's on screen for a very short amount of time. But I remember looking at that shot going, that is, it was so disorienting. Mm-hmm. Like it was almost as if like I was the character's eyes, and I was trying to peek through with the characters, and because the way he split that was so interesting. I hope we can get Rodrigo Prieto on the show, because again, just to talk to him in general about the composition of working with Greta on Barbie and then shooting this film.
But I think he shot this a long time ago. I think he shot this a while ago.
It's still wild. Like Matthew Libatique shot Venom 1 and Stars Born that came out in the same year. Like you're talking about, like, it's just interesting to see a cinematographer flex those different muscles
Should have won for Venom.
Yeah, but Jake, you obviously have something that is very relevant to our discussion that you want to bring up.
Oh yeah, for sure. Just a shameless plug in that I did have the opportunity to sit down with Martin Scorsese for a brief moment, a handful of minutes, and did my best to make the most of it. But I am particularly proud of the conversation that we had. I really try to go in and ask a question that could encompass a little bit of his entire career. I wanted to ask a question that would yield an answer that he would talk about themes that I could use clips of both Flower Moon and Goodfellas and Taxi Driver and Casino if I really wanted to. So there are two different versions of the interview I'd like to plug. On my YouTube channel is just the full raw tape of just from sit down to stand up, just everything that I got there it is. And then obviously just in terms of morning television, I really wanted to kind of spruce it up for my show. And I edited it into a 5.5 minute package that includes a lot of music and movie clips and lines and all that sort of stuff that I'm going to be posting to my Instagram channel. By the time this is up, it will be there already. The thumbnail will be Marty's big smiling face. So just press your thumb on his beautiful face. And I'm very happy with how the piece turned out. And but to be fair, when you have Scorsese talking about sin and you get to use Taxi Driver clips and you get to score it with Rolling Stones, Give Me Shelter.
Great question.
Anything comes out
and
good
I will,
in that regard.
Of course, check the description. I'll have links as long as that's up by the time that I'm publishing this.
Yeah, YouTube's already up, and then the Instagram will be up by the time.
Okay, perfect. YouTube will be up for sure. If it's not up by the time I schedule this on Thursday, check out Jake's Instagram. I'll link your account at the very least.
Well, and I want to throw in at this moment as well, too. Like, we see everyone's comments when they say, like, you guys have to get Scorsese on the show, which I think is hilarious.
Don't we?
Yeah, it's very sweet of you guys.
Oh, yeah.
And, obviously, of course, we fought to get him on, and hopefully we get him on again at this point, and was so thrilled that Jake got the opportunity to sit down with him. And it was one of those situations where Jake's question, which referenced the fact that Scorsese has a line reading in Mean Streets, which turned 50.
Yeah. It's
now,
the first line in Mean Streets and the last line in Killers of the Flower Moon.
And so when you told me that was your question, like to use that as the sandwiches boards of, this conversation of Scorsese's analysis of sin, I was so disgusted at how good it was.
It's really good.
So I was like, God damn it. And then he, says this Scorsese, and Scorsese says, I never even thought of it that way. And I mean, that's...
Jake, what if you're the reason he says, you know what, I'm never making another one. It's perfect ending.
That's it.
He's like, perfect end of my career. I'm never making another movie.
That handsome kid from Chicago told me I nailed it.
And Jake's like, I feel so conflicted.
I talked to Sean before I went in, and he was Sean was making a joke about, he's just going to talk about silence the whole time. You're going to get 5 minutes on silence. And so my follow up to my sin question was, of all of his characters, whose soul is he most worried about? And he gave me two. Ernest from Killers of the Flower Moon, and then the priest from Silence. In the back of my mind, I thought, son of a bitch, Sean. God. Now, I do find it interesting that of all the characters he's worried about going to hell, the priest from Silence is one of them. But yeah,
well, whose character is that? Is it Liam Neeson's character?
No, that's Andrew Garfield.
Oh, Garfield's character.
Yeah,
okay,
Rodriguez. Yeah.
So go find Jake's interview clips with Scorsese. They are available. All the different places you can find them. Gabe will link to them, and your call to action in the comments down below. Let us know.
Have you interviewed him before, Sean?
No, I never got him.
Huh.
You should. It's great.
Sounds wonderful.
Really great.
It sounds wonderful.
I hadn't considered
it. Tell us your favorite Scorsese movie in the comments down below. And wait until after you see the Killers of the Flower Moon, because this might be it. And in the meantime, I love that we got a chance to dedicate an entire episode to this film. It absolutely warrants it. Scorsese, obviously. And
I still feel like there's more that we could talk about also.
Easily.
Almost an hour and something minutes. We still didn't even cover it.
Scratching the surface. So and maybe we will continue to talk about the film throughout the award season. I wouldn't be surprised if we get ample opportunities to talk about that. Kevin keeps pitching Rodrigo. We're trying to essentially effort him for the show, and we'll see if that comes together. We can talk about Barbie and Killers of the Flower Moon. Hashtag if it happens. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, follow us on social media at Jake's Takes, at Kevin McCarthy TV, at Sean _O'Connell, at Gabe Kovac, and the show is at ReelBlend. We will talk to you guys very, very soon.
Pay your artists.
Please.
Dunkirk.
We're running out of runway.